This is Kathleen from Sunday Mountain Patterns. Here's the Sage Gathered Neck Top and Dress Full Length tutorial. So this is a peplum bottom or a regular top with darts, and you can have the option to gather the bottom of the top. That doesn't make sense. So we are going to match up the shoulder seams for the bodice, right sides together, and then also do the same for the neckline facing. You can, of course, measure out bias tape. I recommend double wide bias tape for 1/2 inch or wider. And then measure out your elastic to be one of the bias tapes plus 3 inches. So we're going to sew the shoulder seam for the bias, for the neckline facing, and for the bodice itself, a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. Most of this is all going to be 3/8 of 1 inch. So now we're going to lay the garment flat and then attach the neckline facing on the flat around the circle. If you're using bias tape, just unfold the first fold and match up the raw edges to the neckline. And we're matching all the edges up. I'm sorry I'm not in frame. I also forgot to put the pins in the correct direction so that I could pull them out when I'm sewing. So I'm going to sew these together. I'm going to do 1/4 of an inch. The easiest way to do that is to move the needle all the way over to the right and then match up the your foot with the edge. So we're going all the way around, forward and backward stitch so we can secure the stitches. And just go all the way around in a circle. Make sure that you catch both edges. So I wouldn't recommend anything fine like 1/8 of an inch, although 1/4 of an inch can be pretty fine. So forward and backward stitch, we're done. We're going to clip the curves so that it sits nicely. Do not clip through where you sewed, you'll be all mad at yourself. And then we're going to iron this in place. So we're going to fold over the facing. If you have bias tape, you don't need to iron because it's already ironed. So all the way around, and we're going to top stitch along that edge. But first, I'm going to fold over the bottom, the raw edge. If you have fabric that does not fray, you don't need to do this. If you have bias tape, you also don't need to do this. I just do this because this is wovens and it does start fraying. So about 1/2 inch. And then fold over one more time so that we make a casing. Because you want the raw edges tucked on the inside. Which, by the way, when it's curved, it doesn't always cooperate well, so you're going to have to do a little bit of zhuzhing by hand. It's not going to lie flat super nicely. I also realized that the sloth pattern was completely upside down. But I did it after I already cut out the bodice, so it was too late and I didn't have any more fabric. So we're going to leave that area between the 2 pins open on the shoulder because we need to have somewhere to insert the elastic. So here's top stitching. Again, notice the needle's all the way to the right so that I can use the side of my presser foot as a guide. Some people have fancy presser feet. I've never actually honestly used any of those fancy presser feet. The closest I've used is a zipper foot. Even then I have a hack for that. Okay, so now we're going to stitch down the facing. So in this case, I want to be 1/4 of an inch from the folded edge of the facing. So I moved the needle all the way over to the left, and then I'm using the left-hand side of my presser foot as a guide. You might need a little bit of fixing up, even if you pressed it just because it's on the curve. The goal is that this line is evened to the neckline. So that's actually more important than being evened to the fold. But you also want to catch the fold so that you're not having any material sticking out. So there's the point where I'm going to insert the elastic. So now before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and fold over on my marked darts in half, and then pin in place. I'm going to sew along the darts for both front and back. This provides a little bit of shaping so it's not so boxy. So the most straight up method is to just sew it on and leave a little edge and then tie both ends in a double knot. And then trim very close to the edge. But you have to tie secure knots, so double knots. The other method is to forward and backward stitch on each side. But I don't like it as much. It leaves little bumpies on the top and bottom of the fabric. So I don't recommend it. But it is a quick and dirty way of doing it. So here's the other ones. I'm doing the rest of the darts. It was 4 darts in total, 2 darts in front, 2 darts in back. If you want it boxy, you can leave the darts out. It's just going to be a bubbly, right? And then you can watch my hands tying knots because you don't know how to tie knots. I did make a full length video, but it's like an hour and 30 minutes or something. It's ridiculous because I had to do all the options. Let's go slow. All right, so now we're going to string the elastic. I use 2 safety pins on each side, mostly because I don't want the back end to spring out after I've done all that work, because that's happened to me before. So you're just going to string it through. You're going to have to do a little bit of zhuzhing around the shoulders because it might get caught in the seam. So you just pull up the front part of the facing. Okay, so we're definitely stringing all the way around. And then you pull it through, make sure you secure the ends, and then we're going to sew them together right there. So sewing this together, it's pretty easy. You just have them flat, you stretch it out, and then forward and backward stitch or zigzag stitch. Do kind of a tight stitch. You don't want to get it bunched up, but you definitely want to make sure you've caught all of it since it's kind of narrow. Now we're stretching out that part that was unsewn and sewing it up. Just forward and backward stitching, sew up in line with everything else. Okay, so here's my trick for doing ease for shoulder caps. Use your scissors, no thread in the needle, and you just sew it, and it'll make a little scrunchy parts, which will make just the right amount of ease you need for a fitted cap without having to remember to pull out the thread if you were to do by basting stitches. So now we're going to match up the center with the shoulder and the ends of the sleeve, and then ease around the sleeve cap on the armhole, or the arm side, as it were. So do this on the other side. I've already marked the center. You just fold it in half because it's even both sides for these types of sleeves. It's not like a 2-part sleeve like for a lady's sleeve. So this is also useful for the long sleeve version. I'm just showing the short sleeve version, but it's the same steps. Now the sleeveless version will come after this. So we're gonna tack on the sleeves. I do like having the sleeve on top, just so I can see where it is. You definitely want to make sure that the sleeve is being caught with the bodice, because if not, you have to redo it. So once we've done the sleeve, we can go ahead and finish the seam here, either by zigzag stitching, pinking, or using a serger. That's for the sleeves. Because once you sew it, it's really hard to finish the seam once you've finished the garment, because it's enclosed in another seam. All right, so we're going to fold up the seams. The hem, double fold 1/2 inch or more if you like. If you want a shorter sleeve, shorter sleeve. I'm going to sew between those pins. Notice I'm leaving about 1 inch to 1.5 inches from each side, and there's my baby trying to help, and I'm trying to keep him from hurting himself. So leave that end so you can have a nice clean finish when you sew the side seam. All right, so this is the sleeveless version. We're going to match the front and back arm side or facings together, just at the shoulder. And then we're going to press around the curve. You can, of course, use bias tape, which I actually highly recommend. It's much easier than doing this. But just some people don't like bias tape. I didn't used to either until I figured out how to actually use it, and I was like, oh, this is much easier. You just sew along the fold of the bias tape. Okay, so now we're going to pin the armhole facing to the armhole, right sides together, match the shoulder and the ends. They should match up perfectly. When I drafted, I just took a copy from the Bodice, so it should match up beautifully. So this is the version with the bias tape. It's already been cut, or will be cut to the length. So notice where I'm putting the pins. I'm matching the ends up and I'm putting the pins where the fold is because that's where I'm going to sew. So we're going to sew the bias tape in place. This is the same method as with the facing. You just sew at about 1/4 inch. Okay, do both sides. But you'll see how the bias tape is much easier because you don't have to worry about the curve so much. Okay. So if you have bias tape or the facing, you're going to flip it over, press it in place. If you feel the need, please go ahead and clip the curves if you need to. That's a particularly stiff or thick material. This was neither stiff nor thick. All right, so we're going to pin it in place. And we're not going to sew the last and first inch and a half. That's so we can finish nicely. So I'm leaving that open and then sewing down along where the top stitching. This in place. Other side. You also want to make sure you get the fold so it doesn't flap open to the raw edge. So now we're going to sew down the sides by matching up the bottoms, matching the seam for the sleeve or where the arm size starts for the sleeveless, and then unfolding that one fold, either for the sleeveless or for the sleeves, so that when we sew, you can roll it over when you're done. So in this case, I'm doing it from the bottom up, but you can certainly do from the wrist down or the sleeve down. It's easier if the seam goes towards the sleeve. And then see how that's rolled out and the forward and backward stitch. Now we're going to do the skirt if you're doing the dress option. So we're going to be the longest stitch to base stitch along the top edge, and then do a second line because this is kind of long, so 2 lines definitely help with gathering. So we're going to gather it. We're going to grab, I'm sorry this lighting is inconsistent here. We're going to grab the bobbin thread and pull gently and distribute out all of that. Gathers around the skirt. If you hear anything, those are birds. They're trying to eat my dog's food. Because my dog leaves it out for them. They're having their breakfast. So now that we've got it gathered, we're going to match right sides together. The gathers are going to point downwards and the bodice is going to point upwards. And we're going to stitch this in place. Just evenly distribute the gathers. It's going to look super cute, trust me. So we do this for the front and the back. And we're going to stitch in place. You might need to use a little bit of helping. So forward and backward stitch to hold it in place. Now we're doing a regular length stitch because we're actually stitching it on place. The skirt on place to the bodice, I should say. And we get to the end, forward backward stitch that. Now we have to pull out all of the gathering threads. So if you have the time, use different color thread. And this is the back then. And the back is slightly longer than the front, just because, usually kids have diapers or butts, so that's what I call it for my kids. So it's just slightly longer. It's not super long. So now that we're done here, you can go ahead and pull out the basting stitches. It's the back of my head, because you need to watch that. All right, so we're going to finish the edges. You can, again, pink, zigzag stitch, or put it in the serger. Serge is best. If you want to, you can move the seam up and then top stitch the seam allowance. Okay. Now I'm doing the side seam again. Sorry. Just showing you twice. If you've already done it, you're good. So we're unrolling. And then we're going to stitch it up. So this is for either the skirt or the top. It'll work either way. Long sleeve, short sleeve, it will work. Okay, so here's the short sleeve version, and my Genobi pooped out on me, so I switched to my vintage machine. So you notice how I rolled out that the bias tape up one fold? That's how you do it. So that's the skirt version. Then we're going to flip this over, and this is the same thing for your sleeve. Flip it over and fold over that little bit of part that you flipped up and sew it down. And then we're going to finish the side seam. Both sides, of course. Okay, so we are going to fold that over. That's for the sleeve version. You already saw the short sleeve version, the sleeveless version. We're going to tack that down there, just between where it's open. This makes a nice smooth surface for the sleeve. It's just hard to do the sleeve itself on the machine because these are so tiny. So now we're going to flip up 1/2 inch, press, and then press open the seam allowances, of course, if you can. And then fold up one more time after that to hem it. I am eyeballing it here, but you definitely can use a ruler like I just did very quickly to make sure that you're on point. This will also work for the skirt. You just will have a bit more fabric to stitch. So you can, I'm going to sew this on the outside mostly because at this point my machine was the bobbin was not cooperating. It needed to get taken in for service, but you can definitely sew from the other side if your bobbin threads is cooperating. But I want to make sure that if I'm doing this, I'm catching that edge. Another secret, you can use that steam and press seam maker. So here I'm finishing up the sleeve. It's just that 1 inch or 1/2 inch, 1 inch or 2 inch difference to enclose it. So it's nice and smooth. It's the underarm part, so it should be less noticeable. You do both sides if it's the sleeve version. Of course, if it's the sleeveless version, you do both sides as well. Okay, so now we're doing the hem. I've moved the needle all the way to the left so that I can catch the edge. And I know it's about, I know I measured it 1/2 inch, so I should be just inside the 1/2 inch so that I can catch the fold. Okay, so if you wanted to do the elastic version, yeah, measure half of the diameter and then 2 or 3 inches, depending on how chunky your baby is. So in this case, you do need to leave 1 inch open so you can string through the elastic. I made this too narrow. I had to switch to a smaller head safety pin. So you just do all the tedious stringing through. Not so tedious when it's at like 400% fast, is it? And we're going. And then, you know, just move the fabric down along the elastic. It'll do a nice gather. By the way, I tried doing gathers for the skirt and it looks silly, so I just left it out. I didn't like the way it looked, I should say. Okay, so we're getting towards the end. I'm going to pull this through. And we're going to sew the elastic together. This is a 3/8 inch thick elastic. It works quite well, I think. We're going to sew it and then tuck that under and sew it down. So if you have the skirt option or the dress option, go ahead and finish the side seam. Note the dress option can also have sleeves. I just chose to do this option so I could also show the sleeveless version. So this one's going to be a lot more sewing because it's a skirt. And just do the 1/2 inch fold over. I think this is more like 3/8 inch, honestly. So the waist is going to actually, the bottom of the waist part of the skirt is going to hit at the hips, and then the peplum skirt should go from there. It's going to be a short skirt because it's actually just added on peplum style skirt. It's gathered skirt. It's nothing fancy, sorry. So if I could just stop putting my head in the shot, the camera wouldn't keep focusing on it instead of what I'm doing. But you're double folding all the way around in a circle, trimming as you go. The smaller your seam is, and not your seam, your hem is, the easier time you'll have with this because it's now sort of curved. So we're going to forward and backward stitch. So you can see here, my little old machine is doing quite well. So I can do it from the inside and still have the bobbin thread looking good. So just make sure you've caught that fold so that you catch the raw edge underneath and it stays inside the skirt. So in this case, we can go all the way around. We don't have to leave any opening for stringing through, for casing to string through elastic. This is a big skirt, by the way. This print would have been so cute if I could have just had the sloths right side up. But I forgot, sloths hang upside down. All right, forward and backward stitch and then trim. And then I believe you're done. We can press and you're done. So thank you. This is available in my shop, my Etsy shop. That's Sunny Mountain Pattern. Without an S. I don't know how to count. I didn't get the right number of letters.